So, David Wheeler, professional footballer, masters graduate, soon come environmental activist. He's won multiple accolades throughout his career. He's a real example of a footballer. Playing at the highest levels, but going beyond football and making an impact beyond football. Welcome to the Beyond Football podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you on finally.
Yeah.
After a number of attempts, but it's great to have you on, man. But as we always like to start, we always like to go back to the root. Was football was a dream for you?
Yeah, I think it's one of those sort of cliche things where, as young as I can remember, it was always just kicking a ball up against the wall and being down the park till it went dark and playing with mates. And I think probably France '98 World Cup was where I fell in love with football. And then the year after, Man United winning the treble was like another moment where I think that's when I was hooked. And from then on, it was just, there was no way back really. I think I've always loved all sport, but football was always the one for me.
Yeah. The beautiful game, man. You can't love it. So you're a Man United supporter?
Yes and no. Like as a kid, for sure, super passionate. I think over the years going into professional football, and obviously from my background, not really having any attachment to Manchester itself, that passion has sort of drifted a bit. I think I've supported Brighton over the recent years. And I think England's really the only thing that really, so I'm properly looking forward to the Euros.
Yeah.
It's like the only thing that really properly gets me off my seat now, I'd say.
Do you think they have a chance?
Oh, they absolutely have a chance, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, fingers crossed they go all the way. But in two of my old teammates, Ollie Watkins and Ebere Eze, like in the squad is pretty cool. So
No, it's amazing. I feel like they've definitely have it what it takes to win it. But it's just
I think
it's
so.
always bottle it.
I think they have done. in the last couple of tournaments for sure. But then you have someone like Bellingham who's just come to the fore recently, who has the confidence, like the borderline arrogance that perhaps we've lacked.
Yeah.
In recent years, I think he just seems fearless, and to have someone that young that leads the team is pretty cool.
Yeah, 100%. They create the best talent. So where did your football journey start? Like, how did it start?
So I think my dad just took me along to a local village team, just playing with friends. And then I went to a summer soccer school, we'll do in the summer, just like childcare for mum and dad probably. And ended up being sort of spotted or selected for like another camp, they picked sort of the best couple of players from all these camps, and I went to this next camp and just was one of the best players at that camp, but that was kind of the end of the road. And I think my dad had discussions with the coaches there and said, like, you need to take him to Brighton. And so my dad just called them up and said, these coaches suggested maybe come to try and train at Brighton, see how he gets on. And so that's what ended up happening. And I went to Brighton, and I think they'd normally have you on trial for say like 6 weeks, and I was there for a couple of weeks and I don't know how long the contract was, but signed the contract with Brighton for a couple of years, and then got extended by 4 years after those 2 years. So I was there from 10 till 16 and playing like county football alongside that. And then at 16, when you'd obviously get offered a scholar or YTS, I got released.
Okay. It's interesting. Obviously, hearing how people get into the academy system is so different from person to person. But what are some like experiences or lessons you learned from obviously that time being at that academy from 10 to 16 that's definitely like helped you like in life now?
Yeah, I mean, it was incredibly intense and high pressurized from such a young age, and I'm quite conflicted on the pathway for kids these days entering it even younger than what I did at that time. I entered it at 10, and there are kids that are entering it at 7, 8 years old. And I'm very conflicted about that because I feel like you should enjoy the game as long as possible in its purest form, and that's just playing with your mates and enjoying yourself. And so but I think it definitely taught me discipline. It definitely taught me core skills in terms of football. But I think character-wise, in other aspects, it didn't. I think it narrowed my sense of who I was. And so, it's quite pertinent to this particular podcast is that I felt like my sense of self-worth was so wrapped around my footballing ability that when at 16 I did get released, it felt like the world had ended, and I felt, my confidence had been completely shattered.
Yeah, it's interesting. You spoke about obviously just young players enjoying it during those early stages. Did you not enjoy it then?
I don't really think. I mean, there were definitely moments because I always felt that I was always quite quick. I was always like athletically quite good. I was never technically the best, but I had definitely had moments. So there were, training multiple sessions and games where I was like, that was great. I did really well. But I think I really felt the pressure at that age, and my anxiety was quite high a lot of the time, and that often affected my performances. And the pressure often affected how I viewed the game. And I often question whether I actually was enjoying it, I think. And I think on some level I was, but I think the amount of anxiety and the amount of stress that I was under to perform and succeed really diminished that enjoyment. And so I found often I would play better when I was playing for Sussex, for the county team, or if I was playing for my school, because I was free.
Yeah. Nice. So interesting, man. You spoke about that sense of self-worth being wrapped around football around those early ages. Like, what was that experience actually like? Like, talk me through like a day or experience in terms of like interacting with people outside of football and how that was like.
With when I was playing at Brighton.
Yeah.
So it was one of those things where I grew up, I was in the same area my whole life, and I was in the same town my whole life, and most of my family lived locally. And so everyone I knew was in this small pocket of Sussex. And I was kind of known as like the footballer, or the sporty one. So throughout school, it was always, that was who I was known for. And so I never really felt like I had developed too much else to my personality other than that. And as much as I love sport, it left me in like a bit of a vulnerable position, I think. Like I was into athletics, I played a bit of cricket, a bit of rugby, but aside from sport, there wasn't too much else. And I think that definitely caused some issues.
Yeah. It's a situation that a lot of players find themselves in. I wanted to touch on what you spoke about in terms of the pressure, the anxiety to perform at that young age. And I know you've studied, obviously you delve into the world of psychology and sports psychology and what's that's like. What do you think are like key things that might have helped you during that period? Obviously from your study of psychology and everything.
I think I was fortunate in some ways, because I think I had quite a solid upbringing, and an upbringing that was, it wasn't necessarily sort of ethical and moral in a religious way, but there was certainly aspects that were taken, say, from Christianity, where there was a lot of how my mum and dad would operate and teach me was quite morally and ethically focused and based. So my perseverance with football throughout my difficulty in, say, whether that's anxiety or rejection and disappointment, I think partly was wrapped around not wanting to let other people down. Partly it was trying to follow what I valued. And you might have heard of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. There's also acceptance and commitment therapy, which is like a newer version of psychology and psychology therapy. And a lot of it's based around action. So it's not necessarily like reframing your thoughts, or that is part of it. It's focused around what are your beliefs, what are your values, and how do you put those into action? Because everyone can have those beliefs and values, but not necessarily act upon it. We'd all like to be a certain person, but we might get lost in a TV series, or we might want to go out with mates and we just put things on a back burner. So I think I was lucky in that sense that I had that grounding, but I also think that was partly out of fear at a young age. It's not anymore, but partly out of fear that I was like, if this doesn't work, if sport doesn't work, what else is there? So I kind of felt, at times I felt so anxious I didn't really want to play a game. But that fear sometimes, and that need to please other people, please my community where I grew up, my friends, my family, not let people down, was one of those core things that kept me persevering. So I think everyone talks about grit and resilience and perseverance all the time in sport, and there are different ways to get to that. And my way has evolved throughout the years because it needed to evolve, because I played for numerous years in non-league, in National League South, National League Premier, was never sure that I was ever going to play professionally. And I realised very soon when I signed for Exeter in League Two that I was going to need to figure out how I was going to overcome this performance-related anxiety, because it was affecting my ability to be a professional footballer. So I had to, instead of it becoming not letting people down, I had to reframe and change my relationship with perseverance and grit, and who is it actually for? And it had to be more for me. And then it was a case of trying to hone and establish tools and psychological tools to not only deal with that stress and anxiety, but also to use that as a way of pushing me forward and trying to succeed what I wanted to in football.
Wow, that's powerful, man. That's like some deep level of introspection that I feel like a lot of players need to do in order to obviously reframe their whys and what's really driving and fueling them, man. So what are some of those techniques, psychological techniques that you use to obviously reframe that mindset completely?
I think some of it in the initial stages was really assessing my thought processes of what it was that was making me anxious. And a lot of it revolved around negativity, which is obviously very simple, but often I would visualize and I would think some of my worries would be like, oh, what if I miss an open goal in front of 5,000 people? Or why wasn't I thinking, or what if I score a goal in front of 5,000 people? How cool would that be? And a lot of it was just kind of just trying to jog my mind into being like, okay, this could happen. But what about this? Because before it was like, oh, what if this happened? This would be awful. This would be like terrifying if this happened. But my mind never went, oh, but this could happen. So part of it was just a simple like, yeah, but what about this? Just giving I was only listening to the devil on my shoulder. I wasn't listening to the angel on my shoulder.
Yeah.
So it was partly, opening my ears to that. And then another simple thing to have done was thinking, well, why am I doing this? Like, what is the goal? What am I trying to achieve? And it was simply writing down all the things I would do in a day, for example, and which one of those things was towards what I wanted to achieve and which ones was away. So, and a simple example would be like grabbing a sandwich for lunch. Is that towards becoming a Premier League footballer, or is that away from becoming a Premier League? It's away. But then every single little habit is watching another episode of Game of Thrones and going to bed at 1 a.m. Is that towards or away from what I want to achieve? It's away. And obviously, I'm not saying I adhered to every single one of those because, you know, people are human beings. But just that simple technique was a way to actually just put it down in black and white and see, okay, there's no way of me just drifting through life now because I can just see the choices that I'm making and whether that's towards or away from. And if most of my moves were towards what I wanted to do, I could hold my hands up and say, I'm doing my best. If I'm not achieving what I want to achieve, I'm doing my best. I'm making the right decisions. So that was certainly part of it. But again, alluding to this podcast and what you guys do is, and one of the things that really diffused that fear that I was speaking about earlier about the fragility of my personality being wrapped around my success in football, insulating me from that was about creating a bigger sense of self so that if I was injured or if I wasn't selected or if the team was losing or if I'd miss an open goal, I was still David Wheeler, the environmentalist, or David Wheeler, the political activist, or David Wheeler, the sports psychology graduate. There was more to who I was than just a football player, which wasn't necessarily the case earlier in life.
Wow, that's powerful, man. Increasing your sense of self. I think that's what all footballers need to do. Increase your sense of self. Just shows that you're basically saying that once you have more strings to your bow, it gives you that range to decrease your fear.
For sure. And I think it's not, if football doesn't work out, it's not a fatal blow. It might be you're wounded, but you'll heal. Whereas, you know, the fatal blow would be if that's all you have. And I think for a lot of football clubs, they force players, especially young players, into believing that this is all there is, and if you don't give all of yourself to this, you have no chance. I fundamentally believe that's nonsense. And I've seen, you know, even people like Ilkay Gundogan now is doing it was a business degree with the
PFA.
With the PFA.
Yeah.
You've got seasoned Premier League international footballers who are currently playing still building a bigger sense of who they are. People like Hector Bellerin, also into environmentalism, but into fashion as well. Like, you got all these players, example after example, who are seemingly much more healthy mentally as much as physically, that are also expanding a sense of who they are. Because realistically, the majority of us who haven't made it to the top are still going to have to work after football, and whatever we do next is going to be a much longer career than being a footballer. So, like, all footballers need to have that in mind.
100%. We totally agree. All footballers need to have that second plan A and that identity beyond football. But I wanted to take you back through, obviously, that devastating experience of being let go by Brighton at under 16s, and how was that for you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember necessarily too much of what was said. I think because of the shock of it, I think I just got lost on me a little bit. To give him his due, the director of football, Martin Hinshelwood, at the time, he come to my house and sat down in my living room and told me, which is not what every club does and not what every director of football would do in that scenario, but he told me straight, to my face, which is to give him his due. Like, not many do that. Didn't stop me from fundamentally disagreeing with the decision, obviously. And I vividly remember my dad having to leave the room midway through the conversation because he was so angry. And yeah, just remember being completely shell-shocked, completely stunned, and because I think up until that point I'd never faced any sort of rejection in a football sense or a sporting sense. So that was a big shock to the system. But I think my immediate response was quite telling, because the first thing I did was grab a football and go down the park and just kick a ball up against the wall for a couple of hours. That was and so it wasn't so much, I'm gonna take this line down. It was, I'm gonna show him he was wrong.
That's amazing. You spoke about obviously the first time you experienced rejection. I know obviously you're into psychology as well. But I've been reading about obviously rejection and hardship and how those early experiences can shape you and build that grit and perseverance. Do you feel like you would have maybe achieved or get to where you are now without obviously those early rejections?
It's almost impossible to tell. I think technically, physically, I think ability-wise, I had what I needed. But I wasn't a happy person in that environment. So going into being in full-time environment back then, I'm not sure if I'd have enjoyed that. I think I would have I feel like I probably would have become another statistic and just dropped out of the game. Based on how I felt at the time when I was there. And I don't necessarily believe in fate, but the things that happened to me post that experience has contributed to me doing what I have in the game. So obviously initial setback, the rejection, bouncing back from that, playing men's football at a young age for multiple years competitively, week in, week out, at a decent level, in the National League South, National League Prem with Lewis and Staines, and going to university as well, developing a broader sense of self, meeting my wife at university, getting a degree, sort of developing that plan B option, giving me that sort of wider base of support. And then meeting a mentor of mine now, Misha Jervis, who's a doctor of psychology, who not only helped me on a educational level, but also on a personal level, and helped me understand the thoughts I was having, and from a psychology aspect, and inspiring me to develop that part of myself, and the encouragement of my wife to go and seek help, psychological help, when I needed it. And then the fortune of arriving at Exeter in an environment that was nurturing and that gave not only young players a chance, but players from a non-league background like myself, was not particularly common, I don't think, and still don't think is necessarily that common. I know Wimbledon do quite well in terms of giving non-league players a chance. I know there are a few clubs that do well in that respect, but so I think, in a short way, I would say I think what happened to me was the only way I was going to be a professional footballer and have a career in professional football, because for me personally, that's what needed to happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you spoke about becoming another one of those statistics. you find, players who come through academies that they end up dropping out. Why do you think that is? Why so many, players who come through that academy system compared to those who go into non-league, they have like a shorter career span or even having a career?
I think there are lots of different reasons. I think there are obviously going to be many players like me who suffered from anxiety and stress and depression. There are going to be a lot of players that come from poor and deprived backgrounds that have social pressures on them that other players don't have. There are players that, say, come from a wealthy family that everything's there for them, whereas there are other players that they might have to go to work after they get back from school, or they might have to miss training because something's happened at home, or they need to look after their other siblings because their mum or dad needs to go out to work. So those personal factors, and as well as I do, and most of the lads that have played or had aspirations to play in the game know that no excuse is gonna be enough for some coaches and some managers and some clubs. They're just going to see that you were late to training or you didn't make training and you're not dedicated enough. They're not going to see all the other stuff that goes on behind the scenes. So I think there's a lot of that. There's a lot of lack of accommodation for those personal factors. I think football itself is, depending on how you look at it, is incredibly ruthless. Not just in terms of the competitiveness of it, but in terms of how you cope with the majority of scenarios where disappointment is the emotion that you feel and frustration is the emotion that you feel. I often speak about how in order for you to be like elated and joyous and happy about your situation as a professional footballer, often you need 5 or 6 things to align. You need to be fit. You need to be picked to start. You need the team to be playing well so that you can be successful within the team. You need to play well. And if you're a forward player, you need to be scoring or assisting. And if you're a defensive player, you need to be getting clean sheets. Or a goalkeeper, you need to be getting clean sheets. So there's like 5 things that all need to align for you to be like, yeah, that was a great day. Just take one of those things away, it's okay. Take another one of the things, okay, and it's not enjoyable anymore. So I think it takes a lot of practice to be able to sustain that level of punishment psychologically on a regular basis. And I think there are a few players that have the tools to cope with that, which I think needs addressing, because we still don't have sports psychologists as a given at football clubs. It's only really in the upper echelons of the game that we have that. And even then you're talking, 1 day a week, and it's not mandatory. It's like, just the psychologist is...
If you want to chat, yeah.
If you want to chat, they're there, but it's not a given. And I think there's that other difficulty in the fact that most psychologists haven't played the game. So a lot of players think, well, what do they know about it? They don't understand what I'm going through. They haven't played the game. Because I'm sure you would agree that there are countless players in non-league where on their given day you think, how are they not playing in the league? Yeah. How are they not playing the League One Championship, let alone League Two Conference? Like, this guy's a joke. There weren't many times I don't think where I played in non-league where I thought, that guy's quality. Like, that guy shouldn't be here. Most games there was someone at least where I was like, wow, either technically brilliant or rapid or had something where you're like, wow, and just never made it. And I think the psychology aspect of it is significantly undervalued still in football.
Yeah, it is. It is massively, man. Because it's all about that battle of the mind. You know, the best players in the world. You know, you mentioned Jude Bellingham and his arrogance, mentality, the confidence, these psychological components that obviously makes him such a great player at his age. And I feel like, yeah, more needs to be done. More and more needs to be done. Like even the state of it now in terms of academies and having a sports psychologist. The only reason why, you know, governing bodies actually took action is because of detrimental effects. For example, you know, the death of Jeremy Winston. That's when they started to implement where every club has to have a player care officer, and obviously Cap One clubs having a full-time psychologist. But it's like, why are they so slow to implement these things when it's such a necessary component of performance? But yeah, it's just obviously minority influence, and it's interesting.
Exactly,
Man.
and like the joke of it is that the assumption is that when you graduate from the academy, you no longer have mental health issues, that you no longer would benefit from psychology from a performance point of view. I think that's laughable. Like if you think it's important up to 18 years of age, surely it's important up to 35, 40 years of age. Not only from a player care point of view, but from a performance point of view. And it also would help in the transition from having a career and then transitioning into the next career without it having a negative impact on your family life, your personal life. The statistics for divorces and bankruptcies post good professional careers is scary. And that's about not cultivating, you know, a life post football, a life after professional sport.
Yeah.
It's about not having that support and that guidance, that career guidance of, okay, what next? And part of that is allowing players to do it whilst they're playing, because, you know, players that I've played with for years, late 20s, drop off and can't find a club. They wouldn't have accounted for that. And so, yes, you know, players need to focus as much as they can on being the best footballer they can possibly be. But you can't do that for every hour of every day. It's not possible or healthy to do that. And it's important that players are allowed to start building those building blocks before their career finishes, so that it doesn't feel like such a cliff edge.
I find it so scary, man, to obviously think of those situations with players like obviously late 20s, they have families, they have mortgages, but you know, the football world where contracts, everything is just...
This is it though, like
it's crazy.
Even for me, a lot of the lads, you know, players that I'm playing with and have played with over the years say, Wills, you're fine. You know, you've got degrees. You know, you've got other things going on. But even for me, I do worry about it, and it's not. I don't feel like it's just, all I've done since I was, 20 years of age is play footy. So it's going to be a jump. Even with that backing, it's going to be a jump for me to then move into the next thing, and it's inevitably going to be a big drop in wages. So it's also navigating that as well.
Yeah.
With, like you said, with the mortgage, with the kids, like nursery fees are ridiculous.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, it is absolutely crazy. I was at a PFA workshop and they showed that statistic with wages, and I was absolutely gobsmacked. They literally showed that it was a graph. It spoke about obviously compared footballers to the general population and just the earning potentials over their lifespan. And you can just see obviously the footballer one starts so high, but just drops consistently over the years, and then the general population is opposite. You know, it starts low but rises considerably, and it's crazy. It starts to starts to get you thinking as to whether, or not, players are being disillusioned regarding the reality of the game, the beautiful game. The rest of the population thinks, once you become a footballer, you're sorted for life. They all have their golden eyes on you, but the reality is crazy.
The other thing is that it's almost like you have to play. I think some players are often, partly from an ego point of view, but partly from their perception, what other people are thinking, whether that be their friends, their family, or fans, or whatever. They feel they have to keep up this pretense of that they're doing really well, that they're financially really well off. And you often see people that are leasing cars that are taking them to the wire in terms of their pay packet because they wanted to keep up that pretense. And it's very difficult, especially for young lads who are coming into this money maybe for the first time in their life, to have the perspective of in 10 years' time, I might be earning nothing. And it would be prudent to put some of this money away at least for a rainy day, or for when the rainy day comes, because it will come.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is a lot more work being done now in clubs and with the PFA than ever was when I was a young player, which is great, like in terms of financial education and understanding. But yeah, it can never be enough, I don't think, because you're battling against that social perception and that social pressure to sort of keep up with the Joneses and make sure you're driving like a Merc or a BM or whatever, and make sure you're wearing the nicest gear and being seen to be at the nicest clubs or whatever. Like, it's tough to maintain that lifestyle.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Obviously, we both study psychology, and we learn about, social influence, conformity, asset study, but actually obviously seeing it in practice, the conformity our players, they put themselves at a worse position to obviously just to fit in. I find it so interesting. But I know you mentioned earlier on about actually having a mentor, your doctor,
Misha Jervis,
Misha Jervis, and on this podcast, and me as well. Mentors are massive and so important, obviously, for your development. Like, how has that obviously shaped your journey?
Yeah, hugely. Obviously, there's people throughout your life like that have real influence on you and really help mold you into the person that you are. Obviously, I spoke about my parents already. My brother, who's autistic, who runs marathons and who inspires me as well. And probably he's given me a different perspective on life and a healthy perspective on life, that to not count people out and to always be respectful of people regardless of, what their disabilities are and what differences they have. My coaches that picked me up off the floor at Lewis, Jason Hopkinson and Steve Ibbotson, who just gave me the love of football back. A friend of mine who's a friend to this day, who I just played against. He was playing for Bath City and I was playing for Staines, and I just played against a couple of times, and he just pulled me to one side in the bar after the game and said, I think you can go pro. Like, would you be up for it? I was like, yeah. Like, he's like, I can get you a trial at Exeter. I was like, in my head, I was like, where's that? Like, where's that? What league are they in? And still a friend of mine to this day, and still helps me and supports me and checks on me and sees if I'm all right, and hasn't really made anything out of it. A few quid, but not a lot. Had a massive influence on my life. And then obviously teammates over the years, senior players generally who have taken me under their wing, who've sort of supported me and showed me what it takes to be a professional and to be consistent over the years with that. Spoke about Misha with psychology, obviously my wife, and friends in terms of, I have some close friends that have really shaped who I am, and that a lot of that is from a morality point of view, but also from a political point of view, have really tested me and challenged me to be a better person. My wife certainly has shifted my mindset over the years of being fairly negative minded, not in a, how to frame this in a way that makes sense. I was never like a moody person. I was always quite an upbeat, quite happy person, but I was happy but negative. So I would often think of things in a negative light and be worried about stuff, but also put a negative spin on things. And my wife was very much the opposite to that, and kind of like shifted that in me. And then my coaches and other coaches and managers over the years, like Paul Tisdale and Steve Perryman, director of football at Exeter, who not only helped me technically but tactically and helped me to be humble and understand the game on a deeper level. And then in recent years, Richard Dobson and Gareth Ainsworth showing me that you can create a culture in a football club that every person, regardless of what your background or what you're into, is welcome and is valued and is championed. And we had a dressing room where you had our current gaffer, Matt Bloomfield, and then you had Adebayo Akinfenwa, and then you had Jason McCarthy and Al Samuel, who are, deeply religious Christians. And then you had me, who was like an environmentalist, activist person. And you had all these different personalities like mashed together, but it worked. And I think in some ways that was certainly created. It wasn't just something that happened accidentally. It's something that was created by Richard Dobson and Gareth Ainsworth deliberately to bring good people together, but and make people feel valued and make people feel welcome. I don't think that was necessarily a coincidence that led to us getting promoted to the Championship against the odds when we were tipped to get relegated. So, I mean, I will have left like so many people out that will have had a massive impact on me as a person and as a player. But I would have a lot of gratitude for everyone that has had that impact.
Yeah, it's amazing. And that non-league journey compared to obviously playing academy football, under 18s, under 23s, we're seeing more and more players come from that side of the game and be more robust and have longer careers. Why do you think that is?
I think partly because to drop down or start in non-league, you have to have a certain level of resilience to keep going as a starting point. I don't know if you listened to Ollie Watkins recently. He was in the High Performance podcast, but he spoke a lot about it. He spoke about going on loan to Western-super-Mare, initially getting released by Exeter and coming back. And he spoke about that willingness to drop down and play a lower level and prove yourself to then come back. And I think it sort of creates that, not only the realization that you can push on and be better and do better, but also that there's always a possibility you could go back down again. So it's fighting to stop that happening, but also giving you that realization that, because oftentimes when I was playing at a lower level in non-league, I would look at league players and be like, put them on a massive pedestal and be like, oh my God, like they must be incredible. That I'd be in awe of them. Like, you know, come up against them in the FA Cup or whatever, you'd be like, oh my God, like we're done for it. They're gonna smash us. And realistically, it over the years it's kind of diminished that for me, that kind of breaking through the levels to an extent. But it's inspiring. It's inspiring seeing people like Ebbs and people like Ollie making it all the way to the top. And I kind of knew both of them would do well. I knew both of them would do well in the championship because of the ability they had. But to go right to the top as they have, it's inspiring.
No, it's interesting. It's kind of like the pathway nowadays that I would say for even especially younger goalkeepers to just play games, man, in non-league.
Yeah, I think. I mean, another example I would use is Ali Al-Hamadi, who's now in the Premier League with Ipswich. Like, not so long ago, we're talking 18 months ago, he was not getting a sniff at Wickham, not making the squad. Goes and takes a chance, and I think he could have signed a new contract at Wickham and stayed in League One as, you know, a League One player, but wouldn't have really played. Took a chance and dropped down to League Two. Played for Wimbledon, banged in the goals, got a move to Ipswich in the Championship, got promoted to the Premier League by taking a chance. And there's multiple examples of that. Sam Nombe, another one, who was with at MK Dons, barely got a sniff at MK Dons, had a breakthrough season, dropped down to League Two to sign for Exeter, and then moved to the Championship. There's just, I think a lot of players, partly from an ego point of view, but partly from worrying that what if they dropped down and didn't play. A lot of players just waste in the stands or on the benches of teams in leagues maybe a bit higher than what they're currently capable of playing in. But often what I've seen, like you said earlier, playing games is the biggest thing. Just wherever you are, you just need to be playing games. That's the best way to get some progress and move up the levels.
And you mentioned earlier on regarding your difficult periods during your journey and your wife, motivating you to go and seek help, professional help from psychologists and more. Like, how was that experience?
Yeah, really, really good. I think it was definitely needed because I was I'd put it off for a long time. I think I'd seen my mum and other people still suffering from anxiety into their 50s, and almost accepting that was just who I was. And then by doing that, it was the realization that on one hand, it's just extremely common. I did the sessions with the psychologist, and after it, she said, "Right, I don't think you need any more sessions." And I was obviously at the time it wasn't like I was healed or anything. I was still like suffering from anxiety, and I was just like, "Really?" And she said, "You will not believe how many people I see every single day that are a million miles worse than you are." And I was just, that kind of blew my mind. So on the one hand, it's seeing that, but also living through it, I've realised that there is a path to a better life and a more fulfilling life, and a life where you can take the joy from life and not feel numb by anxiety or depression. And I think that's like a big motivator for me to move into sports psychology post football. Is partly my own experience of coming through it and having a career in the game, and enjoying life more. But also that my mum never got to. My mum never got to that point where she overcame that anxiety to the point where she could fully enjoy her life.
Yeah, it's very interesting in terms of how much the way someone thinks can affect their behavior, their outlook on life. You know, I've been through different experiences where, you're going through life and you just feel a sense of anxiety, a tightness, and it's just like me and Toby, we speak often about it. The only way you can really change someone is by changing the way they think, downloading a new software into their system. It's like, when you're anxious, you've got that pessimistic mindset. You kind of have it's like a virus in your software. So, therapy, seeing a psychologist, it's part of the process of downloading that new software, and it makes you feel like a complete different person. Like, I know where I've had a change and obviously renewing of my mind in terms of now, you're in similar situations, but your thought process or the filter that you put on it is completely different. So
it's also it's an interesting way of putting it. It's also when coming back to the action aspect of it, it's also feeling the fear and doing it anyway. Like with my career, I was terrified of playing in front of 4,000 or 5,000 people after playing in front of a few hundred in the league. But the more I did it, the more normal it became. And then playing in front of 10,000 becomes normal. Playing in front of 50,000 becomes normal. The more you do it, it becomes normal. I still do experience levels of panic if ever I have to speak to a room, if ever I have to stand on stage and do a speech, or if I have to do a Q&A or whatever. I sometimes get to like extreme levels of anxiety, borderline panic situation. But I know that A, I can come through it because I've done it before. And B, the more I do it, the less I'm going to feel that feeling, as I have with football. So feeling the fear and doing it anyway is a big thing. Like riding that dragon of anxiety is a big thing. But if you think about any sort of difficulty that people get into with regards to depression and anxiety, a lot of it's about avoiding the thing that makes you anxious or depressed. So whether that's drugs, alcohol, addiction, comfort eating, all these multiple things are just about avoiding thoughts that are harmful, or avoiding thinking about the trauma that you've experienced, whether that be severe trauma or whether that be the anxiety or depression that you feel on a day-to-day basis and can't rationalize and can't think your way out of. It's a way of blocking it out. And that's why for some people, sport is the drug, because it gives you that window of 90 minutes where you're not thinking about anything else. You're just playing footy.
Thierry Henry.
Exactly. And that's can be obviously one of the healthier ways of blocking it out, but you never really fully address it. And so psychology, sports psychology, but any psychology, the main focus is obviously to help people heal and help people live a joyful and fulfilling life. And a lot of that centered around addressing avoidance behavior and giving people the courage to confront what they're fearful of and what's hurting them. And once you do that, it just tends to melt away over time. And so that's a big motivator for me. And I've seen it. I've lived that experience, and I haven't gone to the depths of drug addiction, for example, or not being able to get out of my bed because I'm so depressed. I've been fortunate to have avoided that, but I have been in some dark places and managed to come back from those places. So I have some understanding and some empathy of that. And it's the same with football. You can get into like a seriously dark place in terms of your prospects in football, but ultimately putting one performance, stringing a couple of performances together, all of a sudden, before you know it, like things are back on track.
Yeah. It's amazing in terms of men's mental health and how it can be influenced by psychology. Now, when I first seen that you obviously studied sports psychology alongside it, my eyes lit up because it was like, oh, there's another, footballer that's obviously values that side of the game. But one thing I always find like interesting is like how obviously men are less likely to go out and seek that help. Women are more likely to do that. And do you think it's whether there's enough like male psychologists, sports psychologists, or therapists out there? Because I know there's a big discrepancy between obviously the number of female therapists, psychologists, and male. So I was wondering what your thoughts were about that.
I don't know if it's necessarily. I think that goes hand in hand with the men find it more difficult to speak about their emotions and their mental health, that there are more female psychologists. But I don't know if that's necessarily why, because I think often men feel more comfortable speaking to a female psychologist than a male psychologist. So I don't know if that's necessarily a barrier to men speaking out. I think it's more so the culture of men in society, not just in football, but football is the microcosm of football is hyper masculine. So it's much more, I'd say there's much more stigma in football about mental health than there is in wider society, although it does obviously have a big role in society. There still is that stigma in men's mental health. But I think there's the added aspect of not showing any weakness to your coach and manager that's picking you because you want to play, not showing any weakness to your opponents because you don't want them to get an edge on you, not showing any weakness to your teammates that they might take your place in the team, not showing any weakness to fans who might get on your back, be that your own fans or away fans, not showing any weakness so that you might get abuse on social media. So I think there are a lot of reasons why it's still difficult for, and I think there's a trust element as well. And I think this is another issue, is that there's being a sports psychologist is not a protected status. And whilst there are a lot of well-intentioned, good people that are mind coaches or life coaches or however you'd want to phrase it, they're not qualified. So sometimes you have some bad actors and some charlatans. Like I spoke to someone who'd played hundreds of games at a top level, who'd been in the game for years, who said one of his psychologists was telling the manager everything that the players were telling him. And it transpired that they weren't actually a qualified psychologist. But like things like that completely undermine what psychologists are trying to do, and reinforces the idea to players that you can't trust anyone. And it takes quite a long time to build those relationships and that trust in order for players to be fully open with a psychologist. And I think that coming back to, we were talking about psychology provision in the men's game, it's not valued because it's not there. It's not every league club will now have an analyst. Every league club will have
sports scientists, strength and conditioning coach, massage therapists. It's all data driven. It's all physically driven. But not many still don't have any kind of psychology presence whatsoever. So you're tacitly saying to the players, it's okay, don't worry about the like psychology stuff, we won't talk about that, it's fine. Just as long as you physically get yourself out there and play, it's fine. How's it like at Wickham?
I'd say Wickham's probably an exception to the rule. Not perfect by any means in terms of psychology, but as in psychology provision, we have my mentor Misha Jervis who comes in once a week. But if it was up to me, the psychologist would be in as much as the rest of the staff, because there's not a day goes by that a player is having some kind of difficulty at home or some kind of difficulty with their performance that they need to chat about. There's not a day goes by where a psychologist couldn't have a positive impact on proceedings in training, or perspective on how they could help coaches or managers like frame things, or say if you're in the build up to a playoff campaign, how do you frame that in terms of motivation and concentration and honing in the things that really matter in this very specific moment? What are the things that are going to get us over the line and get us promoted? Or going into a game at the end of the season where you have to win to avoid relegation. How do you prepare a team for that psychologically? Because physically it's there, like ability-wise it's there. Tactically, you'd hope it's there. But those one-off games tend to be about motivation.
And completing a psychology degree and masters alongside being a professional footballer, alongside having a family, all these different things, it's not an easy feat. Like, what's the secret on how you've been able to manage that?
I think a lot of it is having or developing a clear sense of who I am and what I believe in. And then every action comes off the back of that. Following through with my values and my beliefs, regardless of how that makes me feel, whether there's anxiety there or there's stress there, is what's the right thing to do. So all the time is this okay to do this? And if my girls or my wife needs me at home, no. So whilst there is times where it's important that I do a certain thing with sustainability or with psychology or with the football club, then that's okay. But the minute it starts negatively impacting on my family, that's not okay. So it's kind of trying to stay true to those values and belief, and also having over the years developed a clear sense of who I am and what I want to, the person I want to be, not necessarily what I want to achieve, but the person that I want to be.
And in terms of like 3 key things that are or principles that helped you obviously balance football and education, for some like young players, you might think like, how is that possible? What are like 3 key things that you followed that helped you do that?
I think what I just spoke about would be maybe fall under the banner of integrity, like having integrity and following what you want to do and your beliefs, and follow the direction that you've chosen, and follow that with passion, and have integrity with that. I think being kind to yourself, because there are going to be moments where you really don't want to do what you know you have to do. So it's making allowances for yourself and space for yourself, like to process that, whilst also following through with it when the time's right. And I think not trying to be pleasing everyone else, I think, is a big thing, not just for me and my mental health and progression in anything that I do, but in order to focus on the specific things that I want to do, which is psychology, mental health, and environmentalism, climate action, those two particular areas, and weaving football into that has helped me to focus and hone in on exactly what I wanted to do, and don't feel like I need to please everyone, because it's impossible. And the same lesson can be given when you're trying to be a professional footballer. You can't. Not every fan's gonna think you're a good player. There's no way of impressing everyone. So as long as you're happy with what you're doing and the performances that you're producing, that's all you can do. That's enough. I've always been the world's best procrastinator. So university, I'd invent games to waste time. So I'm acutely aware of wanting to, do more things that are more fun and more enjoyable. And I think it's sacrifice. I think sacrifice is a big word. I think sacrifice is has to be one of those things, because if you want to achieve anything, whether that be have a professional football career or, do what I do in terms of my degrees or whatever, I've generally had to sacrifice. And the thing that usually, unfortunately, has taken a back burner is having a laugh, having fun, going out and doing. Obviously, occasionally I get the chance to, and occasionally I'm going to a gig or whatever, or meeting up with mates for a curry. But a lot of the time it's sacrifice, and one of those things is sacrificing that opportunity of always doing the fun thing and the thing that you kind of want to do, but no, you need to park for the time being.
And why is sustainability and environmentalism, climate action so important to you?
It's a good question. It didn't always used to be. I think it comes from the realization and the education, the documentaries I've watched, the articles I've read, the people I've heard speak, the scientists that I've read about, saying that this is something that as a society we have to tackle and we have to solve. And it's going to take anyone and everyone to do their bit. And I think, from a moral point of view, it clashes with my ethics and my morality, in the sense that if I decided I was going to do something that was going to be an act that would be polluting the environment unnecessarily, then that wouldn't sit well with me. So I think from a personal point of view, I want to do my bit. And as a footballer and someone that has a platform, I think it's my responsibility to help the cause more so than other people potentially.
It's powerful. And just to wrap us up, is our statement question: who are you beyond football?
I am environmentalist, climate activist, and trainee psychologist.
Nice. Concise, powerful, beautiful. Well, David, it's been a pleasure to have you on. You know, so many gems, so many insights for a lot of aspiring footballers. So, yeah, thank you very much for coming on.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So, make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe. Make sure you follow David on his journey of obviously balancing football and playing at the highest level. His environmental work, his journey to becoming a qualified psychologist, and yeah. Till next time, be on football. We're out.